Hello, I hope you all are having a wonderful day today. My name is Nate Manning here with Star Wars Newsnet, and I am joined today by Sam Meggs, author of the recently released Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it. Stop watching, go pick it up, read it, come back, do whatever you need to, but please check out this book. So, Sam, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing really, really great. How are you?
I'm good, good. All right. Well, before we dig into the book itself, I kind of wanted to just quickly ask. So you've done a whole lot in your career, but you're kind of just getting going into Star Wars. You wrote a couple comics. You wrote a short story a little while back. So I just wanted to ask. So what types of themes do you like to incorporate into your Star Wars stories?
Yeah, I think that the themes that become apparent in my Star Wars stories are pretty similar to the themes that are relevant to all of my work across a variety of IPs. I definitely have some things that I like to touch on, no matter what I'm working with, what kind of characters I'm working with, what world I'm in. Uh, all of my books are really focused on women and female friendships. Women working together is a really common theme in all of my work. I love to be able to do that with Marin and Seer in Fallen Order. That was really important to me. Another big theme for me is queer representation. That's it's something that I can't always include, especially when working with IP properties. It was something that the team at Respawn made clear that they really wanted me to include in this book when I came onto the project. And so that was really exciting for me. And I'm really glad about that. And generally a a sort of feeling of hope and lightheartedness, which is inherent to the Star Wars universe in general, I think, but is common in all of my work. I'm not really a grim dark kind of writer. I prefer to approach serious topics with a sense of humor, which I think is more difficult in a lot of ways, but also is maybe a little bit more true to how we actually deal with things in real life. When things get hard, we make inappropriate jokes to make ourselves feel better a little bit. So hope and humor are really big in all of my work and in Star Wars as well.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely a lot of all of what you just said in the book, and I really appreciated that.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
thanks.
a lot of fun reading just how kind of lighthearted the book was in a lot of ways, but when it got time to get serious, it got serious. So that was a lot. So that was interesting to see.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, so diving into the book now, and if you're watching, if you haven't read, there might be some spoilers, so be aware of that as we go forward. But starting and just in general, so from page one of the novel, it is very clear to me, at least, that there is a deep love of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the game that came out in 2019. And of course, that's leading into Star Wars Jedi Survivor, but this is kind of the bridge novel. But can you speak to your connection to that first game, if there is one, and how it influenced Battle Scars? Or am I imagining things that you're not a fan of Fallen Order at all?
No, I'm a huge fan of Fallen Order. I played it when it came out. I lived with someone at the time who worked on the game, and so I was I felt very close to it when it came out, and I loved it. And it's a great game. It has wonderful reviews. It's super fun to play. We all know that. But what really attracted me to the game and what connected me to it so deeply was the writing, was the characters, which again I think is a really common theme in all of Star Wars media. The world is cool, the Force is cool, all these ideas are really cool, but what we really love are the characters and the people, and that was consistent and true with JFO, and was especially true for me with Marin. And Marin doesn't come into the picture until really, really late in the game, and I immediately found myself being like, oh my gosh, I want to know more about her. I want to hang out with her more. I want to know what her story is. I want to get into her head. I think the second I finished the game, I tweeted like, "Let me write the Marin book," which sort of happened, which is great. But it it was certainly a real microcosm of what makes Star Wars so wonderful, which is these unique and incredible characters. I mean, watching Grease pour salt on his food for like 20 minutes in a cutscene really sticks with you. And so I loved it, and I just immediately wanted to hang out with all of them more. I'm a real sucker for found family. I'm a real sucker for a ragtag space crew, real sucker for an underdog. So it kind of hit all my real fave sci-fi buttons to be honest.
Mhm. Definitely. Yeah, it's funny because I never even noticed Grease pouring the salt like did in that one cutscene until I saw it online, and then
It's so
from there on
good.
out, every time I replay, I can't not see it.
You
It's
can't
just
miss
one of those
it.
things that is awesome. But yeah, you mentioned it. So let's just jump right into it. Marin, she steals the book through and through. Every single scene she's in, she is wonderful, and I loved what you did with that character. So can you kind of go in a little more detail about how you approached her?
Yeah. What was most interesting for me about Marin was thinking about the fact that she had been virtually alone on Dathomir for years with no one to talk to except for Malicos and some of the brothers. And she had sort of been stewing in anger, hate, frustration, sadness, um, all of these emotions that are really, really hard to heal when you don't have people to talk to about it, or when the person you are talking to about it is maybe encouraging the worst parts of what those emotions do to you and make you become. And I think that a subtitle for this book could really be childhood trauma. The book, everyone on the Mantis is dealing with some sort of like intense, and off the Mantis too. When it comes to the fifth brother, like they're all dealing with some sort of really intense trauma from their past. And we usually in Star Wars get to explore that from the perspective of the Jedi. Not always. I think we have a lot of great books now from anti-hero or villain perspectives, but most of the time we're looking at things from a sort of good guy perspective. And just in media or in books in general, we don't often get to look at things from the perspective of um, a female sort of anti-hero. I mean, Marin's kind of bad in a lot of ways. Her powers come from the dark side.
Yep.
Dathomir is not like a great place necessarily bathed in the light of goodness. That's not what we're dealing with here. And so it was really exciting for me to get to kind of open up Marin's head a little bit and say, you know, how would how would she actually feel about what she's been through, and what her goals are and why, and what does it look like when someone allows themselves to be consumed by the need for vengeance.
Okay. Yeah, just really enjoyed your interpretation of the character and how she interacted with everyone else. And that leads me to kind of the next thing that I wanted to get into is so this book leads us directly into a video game. And so I just wanted to first ask you, how is the process of writing a book that ties into an upcoming video game? Was that tricky? Was it did it come natural?
Yeah, it was a situation where there were like a lot of masters to serve at the same time, you know, because you want primarily the book to be a good story with a beginning and a middle and an end, but you also have the folks at Lucasfilm who have characters and ideas and stories across the board in all forms of media coming up that you kind of have to like work around and through to make sure that you're not like disrupting any of that or stepping on anybody's toes there. And then you also have the Respawn team who are coming up with this next game that has a story and that has its own themes, and that you want to be sure you're setting up without revealing too much, without stealing their thunder or their glory in any particular way, because you want that story to stand on its own, but while also hopefully not feeling like a, a book that doesn't go anywhere because it's setting something else up. You know, you want it to be its own coherent story. So it felt like a lot of kind of bars to clear in order to make a good book that did everything that it needed to do. I hope that we got there. I think that reading Battle Scars is going to set you up really, really nicely for starting to play Survivor. It's going to give you a lot of insight into what the characters are feeling when you get started. It's going to explain where the characters are emotionally and maybe a little bit physically once you get started with the game. It's going to give you a lot of really good insight that you wouldn't have otherwise into what's going on with the characters when you start Survivor, which starts in, I think, a very interesting place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So jumping off of that, and you kind of touched it already. But we'll just move on from there. So jumping off of that, we talked about Marin. Let's move on to Cal. Cal is, of course, the main character of the story. And as we're approaching Survivor, you had to kind of get him there. And we saw a lot of that with how he interacted with every member of the Mantis. So I just kind of wanted to ask, can you walk me through the process of how you approached Cal in this book?
Yeah, I mean, Cal is a very earnest character. He's a video game protagonist, which means that he has a lot of personality, but in a lot of ways, he also serves as a cipher, because you sort of put your own personality into him as the player a little bit too. So I think that the book, as opposed to the game, when you play a video game, often a lot of the supporting cast is allowed to shine where the player character sometimes isn't, necessarily out of good game writing. You're trying to avoid ludonarrative dissonance. You don't want to make the player feel a certain kind of way when they're controlling the character. You should be kind of careful with that stuff. So it's often easier to give bigger, louder personalities to NPCs. And it's easier to kind of like make them more brash or more understandable. And so I think the real opportunity here in this book with Cal was to say, like, okay, we saw what we saw in Fallen Order on the surface of his character, and we got what we were able to get out of a playable character in the ways that serve a video game. But now we can kind of take that to the next level by diving into Cal's head and his thoughts, and by getting into, like, why is he so earnest? Why is this the way that he expresses himself? How does he really feel about his crew? Why does he react the way that he reacts towards them? I think it's a really unique opportunity to spend that kind of time, again, that you don't have in a video game, because it's so focused on action, again, necessarily in order to make a great AAA action adventure game. You don't want to spend a lot of time standing around going like, but what is he feeling? Like, that's not the purpose of a game, but it is the purpose of a book. And so it was really cool to kind of sit down with the Respawn team's initial documentation for Cal, with their ideas about what informs him, what informs his thoughts and his opinions, and be able to build and elaborate on that from there. I think it's a really unique opportunity with a book that you don't get in a game.
Right. Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect to it. Yeah, Cal is my favorite character in the game, but
I love him.
I'm very excited to see where his story goes in Survivor, and hopefully the future. Who knows where the story can go? I know there's talk of a whole host of things for these guys, and a lot of rumors that they could pop up in Disney Plus shows. We'll have to see what happens there. So we'll see.
Let Cameron play Cal on TV. That's
right?
what I think.
Right.
But it's true. I mean, like, it's been a couple years since Fallen Order, and it's still going to be a couple years until Survivor. So, things have happened to Cal. Where is he at this sort of like midpoint in his journey between games? It was cool to be able to kind of consider, like, okay, we know he gets here. We know he started here. So what does this look like for him, and why?
Yeah, so next I wanted to ask a little bit of a hyper-specific question, but my brain just kind of ran wild with some of the little Easter eggs you put in there, with old Legends lore, like bringing back the Kashiri from Old Tribe of the or Lost Tribe of the Sith, and then some Knights of the Old Republic. lore as well. So obviously Fallen Order dealt with ancient civilizations and stuff like that. And so I just wanted to wonder if there's anything to that with Seer, because she's really tied to her past with Eno Cordova as well. So I just wanted to wonder about that. Or maybe you just threw that stuff in there because you're a fan of old Legends lore.
Oh, I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. I think that I'm a huge Knights of the Old Republic fan. I used to work for BioWare. I worked on the remake for a short time. I love that game, and I thought it would be a really I thought it would be a very fitting Easter egg to kind of tie old video game Star Wars to new video game Star Wars in a way that made sense for the narrative, which to your point is through Seer's sort of almost obsession with collecting and archiving Jedi objects and establishing a sort of history and therefore a future for the Jedi through that. But also, I don't know, I'm a deep lore nerd about all of this stuff. One of my favorite things about working for established IPs is getting to dig into quieter histories or, characters, races, experiences that we haven't gotten to see before. And so that was sort of my idea with the Kashiri, was being able to be like, oh, we can establish something for them in the canon that hasn't been established yet. The same thing can be said of the fifth brother, where we've seen him in a bunch of media now, in Obi-Wan and in Rebels, which is very cool. We know virtually nothing about him. And so one of my favorite opportunities with this book was with this film kind of being like, yeah, give him a bit of a backstory, give him a history, give him a story, tell us why he is the way that he is. Which is really fun.
Yeah, which is perfect, because next I wanted to ask about the fifth brother and dive him in a little bit more. I've always liked the character, but he hasn't really stood out to me in any sort of way. So it was cool to get that inside look to how he thinks. So just wanted to ask, why do you think he was an important villain for this particular story?
I like the fifth brother and what we did with him because, without giving too much away, his history was impacted really negatively by the Jedi Order. And listen, I think the fifth brother makes some points. Jedi weren't always great. I think the best antagonists are the ones who think that they're the heroes. And that is certainly the case here with the fifth brother. That felt really important to get across. The fact that everyone has their own idea of what's right, which is not to say that I think the Sith are right. Let's be clear about that. But he thinks he's right for a variety of reasons, and I think that's really important. It also felt really important to connect Seer to another Inquisitor, where she's sort of dealing with the trauma of what happened with Trilla. This is one of the it is yet another encounter with an Inquisitor for her after what happened with Trilla. And how does that trauma continue to manifest for her in different ways? In JFO, we see it manifest in she decided to go to the dark side. We know she's not going to do that anymore. We know she learned her lesson. So what happens now? She that trauma still exists with her. How is she going to try to handle it and heal it, or maybe unhealthily sort of put a band-aid over it now when she runs into another Inquisitor?
Okay. Yeah. Moving on from there. One more spoiler warning from here on out. The rest of my questions are a little bit spoilery, so just be aware if you're watching. Tune out. Come back after you read the book, and don't say I didn't warn you. So the fifth brother is the primary antagonist, but like I said, in a lot of ways, he doesn't really feel like it. To me, someone who is kind of the unintentional antagonist is Fret. I really liked the character and how she played off of everyone else, but in a way, she immediately caused the seemingly irreparable rifts in a group that seemed perfect at the end of Fallen Order. So was that a difficult tightrope to walk as such a fan of these characters?
This is a great question. First of all, I love that you said that the fifth brother doesn't really feel like the antagonist in the way that Fret does, because that is my favorite way to read books and to write books, which is that the external threat is there and it's important, but it is fundamentally external. The real stuff that matters is the internal conflict, which in this case is what happens when an outsider comes in and becomes a part of the crew, which was bound to happen eventually. You know, that's how this crew kind of works. And so the real conflict here is what happens when someone new shows up and how everybody reacts to that. And I think that you said Fret kind of causes a rift between all of these characters, but I would almost say that she reveals the existing rifts that have formed between these characters over the years between JFO and the book, where they've all been kind of getting along, but these tensions have been forming, issues have been forming, they're kind of trying to ignore them, they're bubbling, but they've never been brought to the surface. Fret causes all of that to come to the surface. It also forces them to look at their relationships with each other based on the way that they each interact with Fret. What happens when Marin becomes closer with Fret? And maybe Cal gets a little bit jealous of that and doesn't really understand why. Or, you know, Seer kind of looks at Fret as a threat right away and also has to look within herself to say, like, why am I feeling that way? Instead of, you know, trying to trust her the way that I did with Marin. I think it sort of, it really like brings to the surface a lot of issues that the crew had been trying to keep below because dealing with it would simply be too difficult. And she forces them to have to. And there was going to be something like that, whether it was her or something else eventually. She is sort of the unintentional catalyst, I think.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't think of it like that, but that makes complete sense, recontextualizing everything that happens in the book. Yeah, it's just a wonderful little twist that added a new dynamic to the book that I didn't expect going in. So that was really cool to see. So yeah, kind of the last thing I wanted to ask specifically about the book, and I have to ask you about the ending. It blew me away. The final confrontation with the fifth brother, leading into everything that happened after that. But the specific ending with Cal and Marin together, I don't know. It's tough to interpret, but just wanted to get your perspective on that ending. And was that important for you to leave the book off of that kind of like cliffhanger?
It is important. And I think you should play the next video game if you want further answers to that question.
Oh,
I hate to be that guy, but
I cannot wait.
Intentionally left vague. I mean, again, there are several years between the end of this game and start of Survivor, but I think it does end on a note that could potentially be setting something up for the future. So,
okay,
or maybe not.
I'm crazily excited for Survivor and where the story goes from here. You told a wonderful story in Battle Scars that built on Fallen Order in a lot of ways that I didn't expect. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to wrap up with asking you about what's next for you. Do you want to continue to tell more stories in Star Wars? What kinds of stories do you want to tell? Certain characters you want to explore? And would you like to go into any other mediums in Star Wars, like gaming at all?
Oh yeah, I'm working on a bunch of different projects right now, none of which I can talk about. But for Star Wars, I would love to continue working in this world. I love these characters. I love the universe. I think it would be really fun to do something with Bo-Katan. I mean, she's obviously getting a lot of love as the new Mandalorian season ramps up, I think. And I am in love with Katie Sackhoff, so that probably helps.
We all are. We all are.
I mean, yeah, I'm a human person, so like, of course I am. But I think she could be a really, really fun character, although I'm sure they already have a million plans for her in the works. So, but I think that is the great thing about Star Wars is that there really is an unending wealth of stories that you can tell, people that you can go to. And like, to be totally honest with you, I just want to write more Marin all the time. So Marin comics, that's next.
Oh, I can't wait. I cannot wait. I hope they
that's
give
what
that
I would like
to
to be next. I don't know if that is it. That's my next pitch to somebody important.
I think there's a lot of potential for comics because yeah, I love
the
Star Wars.
comic was amazing, and so I think like it would be cool to get more comics with these guys.
Yeah, I need to revisit that comic before Survivor because Seer endlessly fascinates me, and I'm curious what they're gonna have to do with Survivor with that character. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had for you. Do you have anything else you wanted to say or add?
That's everything. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book, and you can pick up Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars anywhere books are sold now.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned a little bit something more, and excited to check out the book if you haven't and play Survivor on April 28th. This is Nate Mannings from Star Wars Newsnet signing off. Thanks. Bye.